What's up everyone? Alex here. I just turned 44 on June 1st, so to celebrate another trip around the sun, I want to share with you 10 of my favorite games from the past year. That means any game released from June 1st, 2022 to June 1st, 2023 have been considered for this list. But that also means no Elden Ring, Triangle Strategy, or Stranger of Paradise. And keep in mind that the games in this list don't necessarily have to be JRPGs. Though I'm pretty sure you'll know that the genre will have a strong presence here. Let me know what your 10 favorite games from June 1st to June 1st in the comments below. I want to quickly give a shout out to the Backlog Battle Best Buddies over at Patreon, who are sponsoring this video. If you want to get early access to reviews and lists before anyone else, as well as have your name at the end of every video, join us at patreon.com/backlogbattle and become a Best Buddy. I don't normally do special mentions, but I feel the need to for this one, especially given how I admire Cory Barlog and Sony Santa Monica's vision for the new God of War. That's to say that I didn't, and haven't, gotten around to starting God of War Ragnarok, even though hundreds of you have already told me that you've finished it and how incredible it is. So I thought I'd just mention it here, if only to say that I'm still looking forward to playing it someday. Now that that's been taken care of, let's get on with the list. I wanted to start this list with a banger, and what better way to kick it off than with the Crossbell Duology, Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure. When the Western release of the Crossbell Duology was first announced, I thought, well, that's nice, I don't think I need to play through the games or review them, particularly because I knew that the arc's a known oldie but goodie. But despite being busy with a ton of reviews at that moment, I found myself with some time to spare to play through Trails from Zero. And I'm glad that I did, because Zero quickly shot up as one of my favorite games of 2022. And with Trails to Azure coming out a few months later in 2023, I knew that I just had to finish the saga. While I had watched recaps of the Crossbell arc in the past to prepare myself for Cold Steel, playing through the stories themselves brings so much more gravitas to the unfolding events. And getting to know the SSS, thanks to the many cases, side quests, and stories unfolding, gave me a much deeper appreciation of their place in the overall Trails universe. I'm extremely happy to have played through what is now my favorite Trails arc of all time, and if you haven't experienced both games yet, you owe it as a fan of JRPGs to play this pair of games. You probably heard me talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 for the past several months now, including a review, it's mentioned on my 10 out of 10 video, and so on and so forth. And I'm pretty sure you remember what I've said too, like the fact that I like Xenoblade Chronicles because of the mecha and the scale, and how Xenoblade Chronicles 3 introduced a philosophical question that was so enticing to me for some reason. But here, I want to talk about that we actually got a party of 7 people to be able to control. I remember when I first heard about this, I immediately thought, wow, that's going to be really chaotic, and typically Xenoblade Chronicles combat is already chaotic. But what was brilliant about this system is that it actually helped mitigate some of the larger issues with the AI that I had in the past, where sometimes they don't behave the way that I expected them to. And with the addition of the class system and actually formalizing tanks, DPS, and healers, it actually made Xenoblade Chronicles 3 an easy romp. And mind you, that's not a knock on it. But that's of course one aspect of what is essentially your Game of the Year at last year's Backlog Battle Awards. So it just makes sense that it of course belongs on my favorite games of the past year as well. Much like my tropes with tactical RPGs, I've tried and dabbled with a ton of deck builders over the years, trying to find that magical unicorn of a game that will finally get me to truly love the genre. 2022 has been incredible for me in terms of discovering these games, and I'm proud to say that I finally get why people love deck builders thanks to Potionomics. With its exquisite animations and unique gimmick of being both a business management sim and a deck builder, You quote-unquote engage in a haggling battle done through cards, Potionomics opened my eyes to a style of play that many have loved, and the risk management that you had to balance with each haggle session, as well as ensuring your business stays afloat, was just so much fun that I'd easily recommend it to anyone who wants to try games in that genre. And to think that it also has a fantastic and memorable cast, complete with a full story campaign that's endearing and charming, and you've got a perfect mix of ingredients for a great gaming concoction that'll have you smiling and laughing throughout your entire journey. For many years, I've been told that Live Alive was one of those Japanese-only classics that people wished was brought over to the West. It became the stuff of legends as it was directed by Chrono Trigger's Takashi Tokita with a soundtrack composed by then Squaresoft neophyte Yoko Shimomura. So when it was announced early in 2022 that Team Asano was bringing Live Alive to the West, I genuinely jumped with joy. Done in Team Asano's signature HD 2D style, Live Alive is a JRPG like no other. The game took massive swings and risks, like creating an entire chapter in the style of the Alien movies, sans combat, and even mimicking other gameplay styles like fighting games, or even taking place in other time periods that aren't often represented in the genre. And while it's certainly not for everyone, especially if you're looking for a more traditional turn-based JRPG, Live Alive is a time capsule of incredibly innovative ideas that tries to do so much more within the limits of the JRPG genre, creating an experience that is uniquely its own, and one that is deserving of attention and examination. JRPGs don't just have to describe RPGs that came from Japan, or be 20+ hours long in order to be a part of the conversation. The games just have to have passion and a genuine love for the genre, along with a demonstrated knowledge of what makes those games great. Jack Move is one such game, and it certainly won't be the last game I'll talk about on this list that has those qualities. While bordering on the shorter side, roughly 8 hours if you know what you're doing, Jack Move delivered on a compact cyberpunk experience that took us on a journey to take down a mega corporation wanting control of society and everything around it. It's got a heavy Final Fantasy VII lean, not just in its story, but also with the way you use chips to create builds that let you experiment with a ton of different abilities. And with scrumptious animation and a fantastic soundtrack, Jack Move delivered so much entertainment in such a small package that is equal parts satisfying, riveting, and amazing. Much like other genres that I dabble in, the farming sim genre is something that I typically experiment with here and there. So when Square Enix announced that Harvestella is coming out, which was going to be their take on the farming sim genre, I obviously just had to pay attention. I have to be clear that this is not exactly quite like Harvest Moon or Story of Seasons, particularly because Harvestella is more focused on its storytelling and action gameplay than it is the crafting and farming elements. Though I will say that if you don't focus on the crafting and farming, you're gonna have a really tough time trying to get through some of the levels later on. It's because of this that Harvestella feels more like an RPG with farming and crafting than the other way around, which makes it a great introduction to that style of play. It also features an incredible soundtrack by Go Shiina, who's best known for his work on the awesome Tales of Legendia soundtrack. And if you actually played the original Harvestella demo and complained about how fast the time seems to pass, they've actually fixed that in the full game. And they balanced it out so that it's not too punishing and yet still retains a level of challenge that is quite respectable and makes learning its intricacies a ton of fun. And that story, I want to talk about the story right now, but I don't want to spoil it for people. It's heart-wrenching, emotional, and it's probably one of the best Square Enix stories I've experienced in recent memory. I've lived in the US for decades now at this point, but there is a small part of me that misses my life in Southeast Asia. A Space for the Unbound is set during a time when I lived in that region, the 90s to be precise. But this one is set in Indonesia, so it was really surprising to me how similar our lives were, with the height of fighting games represented in the game, And of course, those community moments where you knew everybody in your town and everybody greets everybody and everybody is just super friendly. And yet, apart from this accurate representation of life in Southeast Asia, comes a fantastical story about love, loss, and the importance of every relationship we create, whether inadvertent or not. A Space for the Unbound is one of those narrative-heavy games, but there's so much more to it than that once you start playing it. You'll start feeling for the characters and putting yourself in their shoes and trying to figure out how to best cope with each situation from an emotional and a logical standpoint. The puzzles are also really fun and very creative, and it's got a rule set that is very easy to understand. This isn't one of those point-and-click adventure games that have random elements that all of a sudden make you want to bring up like an encyclopedia or like some sort of forum to ask about what's going on. There are rules to the world, which makes it very engaging and keeps you playing, which is really, really cool. It is certainly a tour de force, not just in terms of its storytelling and visuals, but also its music as well. So if you haven't actually checked out A Space for the Unbound, I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for a fantastic story to play. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was one of those games that I thought would be quote-unquote nice to play if I had the time. So when a fan offered to pick up the game for me so I can give my own impressions of it, naturally I was obliged to play through it. Initially I thought, wow, this is going to be a chore because this game is super long, but a funny thing happened when I started playing it. All of those concerns that I had of the game being too long or me not having any time for it just melted away, owing to the saying that if you really want to, you're gonna make time for it. And The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is certainly demonstrative of that idea. Now, I'm not as far in the game as my wife, but what's really cool about my experience with Tears of the Kingdom is that I can literally just jump into it with the knowledge that I can do whatever the heck I want, experience the world however I want, and I'll find something new around the corner. For me, what really separates Tears of the Kingdom from Breath of the Wild obviously isn't the new areas that you experience in the game, but rather the one simple addition of the attachment features, whether it's attaching two weapons to each other or attaching different objects to one another to create different gizmos and gadgets. This one change ripples across the entirety of the game, and it's done in a very in-universe way too, which I truly appreciate. But most of all, if I really think about why I love Tears of the Kingdom so much, and by proxy, Breath of the Wild, it reminds me of my all-time favorite Zelda game, which is the very first Legend of Zelda on the NES. That feeling of adventure, the expansive environment, and the secrets hiding around each corner is something that I truly appreciate, and really why I love this style of Zelda above all else at this point. Even though I've been known to dabble with all sorts of games, as many of us do, my heart will always yearn for incredibly made, story-rich, turn-based JRPGs. Square Enix and Team Asano delivered exactly that with this year's Octopath Traveler 2, which blew everyone's expectations away. Part of why that is because Team Asano made some very small calculated tweaks to the established formula, making the battles faster, stabilizing the often unstable frame rate, and creating much deeper stories that made those small bits where the party interacts with one another inconsequential to people's enjoyment of the game. Top that off with an incredibly rich world, great characters, and a soundtrack that is easily one of my favorites of all time. Yeah, Partitio's saxophone solo got me good. And Octopath Traveler 2 is yet another must-play turn-based JRPG that proves that the genre is all but dead. It's even stronger than ever before. I talked earlier about how JRPGs don't have to come from Japan, and just needs to be made with both an admiration and an intimate understanding of the genre. And Chained Echoes definitely has all of that in spades, featuring an epic storyline that has the potential to be expanded upon in future games, and a system that's completely done away with the traditional experience/leveling system that still manages to retain the difficulty and challenge of traditional JRPGs, and you've got a very ambitious game that manages to nail every single aspect of its design. And that's a rarity in this industry. But Matthias Linde's Chained Echoes really shows how carefully calculated all of his designs are, and certainly has made me appreciate the thoughtfulness and the amount of work that he's put into this. And in case you didn't know, Matthias worked on this whole thing by himself. Save for the music, of course. That credit goes to Eddie Marianukro, who did a fantastic job and made me buy the soundtrack immediately. And best of all, Matthias demonstrates his absolute love for 16-bit JRPGs by incorporating bits and pieces that are callbacks to his most favorite games, most notably Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, and a little bit of Xenogears. So all of this and so much more are why Chained Echoes is absolutely one of my favorite games of the past year. And if it only came out maybe a week or two before the awards last year, it probably would have won my Game of the Year for last year. Now, if you want to get to know me a little bit better and find out what games I would consider to be on my 10 out of 10 lists of JRPGs, click the video up top and share with you 10 of my 10 out of 10 JRPGs. But if you're curious about what games I want to replay because, I'm 44 and getting older, click the video below to see what games I want to replay. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.